Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint bluebells. So grab your paints and let's get started. So we are going to paint a bluebell today and I'm going to do a nice little composition. So I'm just drawing a curve and I think I'll do one that's sort of coming up underneath as well. So we've got two, so change that curve a bit, there we go. Two nice little stems for bluebells. So I've done that with my HB pencil, can put that to one side. And my bluebell painting is 4 colours: Cadmium Yellow, Sap Green, Cobalt Blue Deep and Permanent Rose. And we start off with a stem mix created by the yellow and green. And I've got my size 2 brush here. And what I've noticed in bluebells is the main bulk of the stem is nice and green, but as the colour travels up, you start to see bluey, purpley tones, which is of course created by the dye from the bluebell itself. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing up the bluebell colour as well. So I want a sort of an indigo kind of colour, a bluey, purpley colour. That is fantastic. And I am going to begin by painting. I've got a size 2 brush here and I'm going to paint sort of up to about there, and you'll soon see why. This is a nice sort of fairly simple approach to painting bluebells. And also this bluebell tutorial, I remember this time last year at the beginning of the pandemic lockdown in the UK, this was the first flower I painted in the form of a PDF worksheet. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing smaller curves coming off the main stem. And what I'm going to do is get a little bit of that purpley colour and start to drop it in just lightly, and I might even want to get a slightly smaller brush. So we're working in a really nice sort of dilute tones. And this is just giving a nice sort of organic feel for the little branches where the bluebells are going to hang off. And of course they're not all going to sort of hang off in a perfect formation, so we'll have 1 or 2 that are just a little bit different in terms of their angling. And then towards the end our bluebells are going to get smaller like that. So that lovely bit of purpley tone is fantastic to just give a really nice organic feel to it. Okay, so I'm going to fill in the next one and then we can get our bells in. Now we have our 2 stems in. Before we paint in our little bluebells, at each little sort of branch opening there is a little sort of frond or 2. And we just want to use a nice small brush. I'm using a 3/10 brush here to just add that little bit of character, just using the fine tip of the brush to curl away these little fronds that are sort of a showing of the sort of growth of the bluebell bells. If you find your colour getting a little bit purple or anything, or just keep remixing it, make sure you get that nice sort of blue. Lovely. It's amazing how much extra you see when you are actually studying a flower. A bluebell is something we all think we're familiar with. Right, now the next step, we're going to paint our bluebells in a series of stages and layers. So we start off with a very simple shape, this sort of a sort of soft oblong in a fairly dilute purpley blue colour, nice and dilute, and just keep on imagining the colour, the sort of direction of the flower. So this one's going to go in behind, continuing on from the direction of that stem, so you might see a little bit behind. We're going to have a few occasions of the bluebell flowers overlapping with each other, which should be nice. This one at this stage just about avoids. And then on the end we'll just have one that's a little bit smaller, but not a lot smaller. These bluebells are in fairly full bloom. Okay, I'll just fill in the others and we'll go on to the next stage. I do have one bell that is overlapping, so I thought I'd leave that one to show you. So I'm going to just paint it in behind, just sort of imagining that shape in its completion. There we go. So the next stage is we sort of build up these bluebells very slowly. The curly petals, the way they sort of finish off is just lovely. So we're going to start with quite a dilute, sort of more dilute bluey colour. So just add a little bit more water in if you want to separate off a little bit. And just keep mixing it, keep making sure that it's a nice bluey colour. That purple, the sort of permanent rose really can dominate this colour. Right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in a nice dilute curl, sort of about 2/3 of the way down. I remember when I was first sort of thinking about painting a bluebell, I couldn't believe how precise and perfect these little curls were. I thought they'd be a bit more random, but they're really amazing. So still using my 3/10 brush. It doesn't matter that the main body of the flower has dried. And I'm going to leave that last one without curling up petals, because I think that one is going to be the one that's still unfurling. So I'm just going to smooth those in one or two cases. Okay, so now I'm going to get a slightly stronger, more concentrated version of the petal mix. And we're going to add in a next level of curly petals. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to start right at the top with this slightly more strong colour and paint down and come out just below that one we painted previously. Okay, so, and we're starting now to create the sort of recognisable multi kind of toned and faceted petal of the bluebell. So this is one of those flowers that I think requires a little bit of planning, a little bit of forethought. And we'll fill in these and go on to the next stage. This last little one up here, because it's not quite properly sort of formed yet, so we just do a few strokes like that, just kicking out there. Okay, and now we're going to put a stroke down the middle, which we want to leave a little bit of that paler colour in the background. And then what I want to do is just clean off my brush. Just want to soften that. So a little hair on the page now. Soften that down into nothing. And basically we are building up a lovely sort of textured piece, a sort of controlled loose style, which one of my wonderful followers coined rather brilliantly, and I think that really does sum me up kind of perfectly. A little bit there. Okay, and just soften it into nothing. And then we just need to let that dry for a minute because we're going to put in one last curl. But for the time being, we can just have a look at the stem. So I'm going to get Sap Green just on its own. No green, no cadmium yellow, I mean. And I want to just now add in just the tiniest bit of extra fresh green. Just edging that stem and then clean off the brush. Come back in with a little bit more. I'm not going to go too far down because we need to add in some leaves, but I can just make that little overlap a little bit more pronounced. And if I just turn it around, so that little bit of extra green is really, really helpful. Okay, we are ready for our last bit of the bluebell once we just let that dry. So with a bit of concentrated petal colour, the blue and the pink combined, I am now doing one last curled petal, which is the one right in front of us. And this can be quite a challenge. It can be hard to paint the things right in front, but essentially you're creating a sort of a triangle, I suppose, a soft-edged triangle. And I like to try and leave a very faint line up the middle. And I just like to add a tiny little bit extra where I see fit. And lastly, we want a bit of that yellow and green in a fairly concentrated style, because sometimes you can see the little filaments popping out the bottom just a tiny weeny bit. Now, last off, we need to add a few leaves, and if I just get the green, a bit more green back into that there. We can do this with a slightly larger brush. So I've got my size 4 brush here. I'm going to make sure the brush is nice and wet. And I am going to paint out, just move those off there. Some slightly sort of soft S curves and C curves. And you can sort of compose them as you wish. And then down at the bottom, I'm just going to sort of blend those so they look like they're all sort of coming out of the same plant. And now I can just add a little bit more green to the stem itself. And then gradually, as these leaves dry, they can have a little bit added to them too. So the last thing we're going to do is just let those dry and add a tiny bit more detail. This was also the perfect moment to rub out any pencil, so I've done that. And if you are sort of confused at how one can rub out pencil when it's been painted over, it is totally possible. And I highly recommend you have a look at my video in watercolour painting for beginners called The Best Pencil to Sketch under watercolour, because it is possible. It's just a little bit of knowing how. So now these have dried, I can just add in a little bit more Sap Green. Sometimes I put in shadow, and sometimes I just add in a bit more of a concentrated version of the colour. You don't always need to add in all sorts of shadow. So I'm going to have this leaf coming over the top of everything else. We can just neaten that up at the end. You don't always need a really strong line to show something's in front of something else. So that's just with a fairly dilute bit of colour. And don't forget sort of seeing how these leaves at the base all sort of are enclosed in each other. And there you go. Some lovely wild spring British bluebells. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons for your support, because that support enables me to keep creating these videos that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button below and comment to let me know how you're getting on. And of course, if you subscribe, then you will never miss another video. Until next time, bye!